All right, so for the final phase of the design process, I'm going to be asking you to scrounge around your house a bit and find a variety of color media, that anything that you can pretty much get your hands on. I know that you guys are left to your own devices here. If we were in school, we would be using a combination of colored pencil, which I have here. Probably some markers that we have access to in the art room. And I have at school, I have a variety of really fancy printed papers that I let students use as collage as well. Obviously, we're not in school and you're left to your own devices here. So if you have colored pencils, that is great, a great medium to add color. Markers are awesome as well to add. We're really just adding hints of color, so I'll go through that with you. Much of your design is going to remain black and white, but just for hints of color, colored pencil and marker are kind of your best choices. If you don't have those things and you just have crayons, can work too. I know we think about crayons as something that you use as like a little kid, but if that's what you have, then that will work just fine. You could use crayons, you could use gel pens, any kind of colored markers, colored pens. You could find like a couple different colored pens, and you could even use highlighters. Find like a couple different colored highlighters, and you're just be adding some emphasis with a highlighted marker. So you really can use whatever it is that you have access to. The other thing that's kind of fun is to throw in things, some unconventional materials like string. I've got some fancy yarns here that I might sort of like montage in to my design as well to make it to add interest. And then when thinking of collage, you don't have to think about the traditional, like, oh, I don't have any printed papers, but even if you have some kind of wrapping paper, something like this could work. We did a collage project in art too, and I had shown them all different ways that they could find collage around their homes in the less traditional sense. So I had cut up, these were bits from an old calendar that I had cut up that I thought were sort of interesting color wise. I had bits of an old map that could certainly be used for collage in this project as well. These were the parts from the old calendar. This was actually a funky purple envelope that I got in the mail. And I cut a shape out of that and used that as collage. So when you're thinking about materials to use for this to add a splash of color or emphasis to your design, you don't have to think in the traditional sense. You can definitely be resourceful and creative in the things that you use to bring this project to a finish. For the color phase of my first design, I'm starting to think about how I want to add interest to my design and how I want to create some areas of emphasis in my design. So first off, I think you guys had seen previously that this was some of the collage material that I had access to. It's just old wrapping paper that I just had a little bit of excess of that I saved for a moment like this, I guess. I like it because the black is a strong graphic element that I think would work well with some of my strong black graphic elements in my design already. And typically like brown, this neutral brown color, tends to go good with other like bright colors. Like even if you see the blue of the scissors next to the brown, it's a nice combination. So I'm just kind of thinking ahead. Not that you really have to be thinking right now in terms of like all your designs as a series yet, but it wouldn't hurt. So I'm kind of thinking for all of my designs so that my set of designs has like a cohesiveness to it, a feeling of unity and harmony working all together. I think I'm going to limit my palette to using the brown and the black, and I'm going to try to incorporate a little bit of this collage, this paper, into each one of my designs going forward. And I think just being inspired by like the blues and greens and the scissors themselves which again, you don't have to limit yourself to the color of your object. You can go with complete abstract color. You can really choose any colors you want, but I do sort of like the way this blue and green plays off of the brown and black. So I think for all of my designs, I'm going to use the brown and the black paper somewhere, and then I'll also use a variety of blues and greens throughout. I like that color combination. Once again, it's your choice. You can go with complete different colors. You could go with neon colors. Really, however you want to do the color part is going to be up to you. And that will also depend on what kind of materials you have access to as well. There are different ways that you can incorporate collage into your piece. I happen to have access to an X-Acto blade. So what I did, the easiest way I felt was to incorporate my wrapping paper was actually to cut out holes and lay the wrapping paper on the back. So you can see here the wrapping paper glued to the back of my image, and I had used the X-Acto blade against this cutting mat here to cut out my circles so that I could let that collage show through. Another way I could have done that was to get my circle stencils again and just trace and cut out the exact circles out from this and lay it and paste it on top of it. So if you don't have access to an X-Acto blade, that's okay. You can use scissors, and there are definite ways that you can find to add collage and fit it into your piece as well. So as you can see here from that previous part of the video, I decided to go with realistic color with the colored pencil to try to make this central part of my design, the part that I originally wanted to have some emphasis on, look realistic. Now, you do not have to have any part of your design be rendered in a realistic way. That's just how I chose to emphasize this central figure here. You can definitely try that depending on what your object is. You can try to render it realistically sometimes. That could be an interesting component to your design, but it is not required. I just thought it would be kind of fun to make the scissors look realistic for this part of the design. I think what I'm going to do for these two scissors though, since I didn't put the inner details, I want them to read as a little bit more flat. So I think I'm going to do a color fade within each of them. And then also make it look like it fades from a lighter, almost like a lime green, to blue to a blue green. And I think I will use these markers to outline them before I go in with colored pencil and create a fade. And for those, I'm just going to color them in as if they're just flat shapes, but I'm going to create a color fade within the shapes just to make it interesting. Anytime you create some sort of a fade from one color to the next or from light to dark, this is sort of review. We've done this before in art. And I've demoed this before in art, but just try to remember back to that stuff that we did in the past and apply it to your designs here. So as you can see, just in terms of technique for the realistic pair of scissors and the color fade pair of scissors, I'm working in a step down method. So we've talked about this before in class. The step down method is when you start with your lightest colors. You work in layers. You work with multiple colors, even if you're just trying to achieve blue or green, right? You choose multiple shades, and you work in what's called the step down method, which means starting with the lightest as a base and then continuing working up towards a darker value. And after watching me demonstrate both of these, you could see that I use that step down method for both types of techniques, both realistic and just for the color fade. So if you have like a grouping of colored pencils like this, now I have all kinds of fancy colors because I have a set of like a million Prismacolor colored pencils because I'm an artist and I just have supplies like that, right? Like good supplies are important to me. So I have a lot of different colors, and the way I would say step this down is start, you might have even noticed that on the realistic pair, I even started with this coat of what, it's like an off-white color. And I started with just a base of that. That kind of helped me blend my other colors into it. So you can always start with white as a base. It just creates kind of like a waxy sort of a surface for you to blend your other colors into. And then I would use these colors together, and then say I was going to my greens. Actually, I might fit this one in between there. Step up down to that color. Maybe get this one in there. And then this one and this one. So always stepping down from lightest to darkest and building up to your darker values from your lightest value and layering. And you can see that layering multiple colors, even just to get one simple color like blue, is a great way to get rich, vivid, vibrant color. So whenever you're coloring with colored pencils, always layer. The key is layering. Layer in multiple directions with multiple colors, and multiple layers is always the best effect. You might have noticed also a little bit before in the demo when I was shading in the realistic pair of scissors, I did work up to these darker blues at one point, but then when I wanted to do these darker shadow areas, I found a color that was close to the complement of blue, which is orange. Anytime you mix complementary colors together, you'll get like a darker kind of muted shade of a color. So I even threw some of that in there for my shadow effects, just to enhance some of my highlighted areas, which I feel gave it a bit more dimension as well. So anytime you're shading with colored pencil, even if you're using crayon, it's the same way I would approach, or pastels, or whatever you have you can get your hands on for this. Any sort of dry media like that, you'd use it in the same way. You'd always layer as much as you can, stepping down to your darkest values as you build up your layers. Now that I have all my color fades done, and I have all my actual objects filled in with color, you can see that a couple things have started to happen. My objects, my repeated objects, my scissors, have become much more prominent in the design because of the bright color. And I like that. I like that effect. I like the color with the stark black and white. And also with the brown incorporated in there. I think it's nice. The only issue I have right now is it almost feels like two separate designs. Like this design is one thing, and then like above it is a separate thing, and they feel separate because all my color, all my vivid color is stuck down at the bottom of my composition, and all of this is just black and white or brown. So I think the only thing I have left to do now is to figure out how I want to unify this design. I could do that in a number of ways. There are multiple solutions, of course, just like to most problems in art. There's never one solution, there's always many. It's just about choosing the solution that's right for you. I might decide to get maybe like a blue marker or blue colored pencil and somehow sneak some blue up into this region of my composition. This is the only area with blue. Now that was intentional because I did want to make this have emphasis, but I also do want to have a sense of balance and unity in the piece. So I think incorporating some kind of blue maybe up top, maybe like a blue-green to balance out the blue-green, something like blue or green or the lime green, and sneak it up here somehow. Now I've had people go full color with their designs, and that looks good too. I do want to keep the majority of the negative space just black and white. So whatever I do, I want to make sure that I'm not like, I don't want to fill in my white space. I want to keep it. I like that stark black and white. I think it looks good. Now, if you want to go full color on your design, that's totally up to you. Like I said, I've had students do full color designs with really rich, vivid colors, and those look good as well. But for my personal preference, if you remember, I originally liked the combination of the brown with the black and white plus color. So I want to keep that while still finding a way to balance out my bright colors down at the bottom of my design. So that's my next and probably final task. So here is my completed design for design number 1, showing rhythm and movement. And I used these two utensils, this pale green marker and this white gel pen, to add some finishing touches into my artwork. For my unifying factor, the issue I was talking about, sneaking some color up into some of the rest of my negative space, I thought of a couple of different options. I had thought about getting maybe blue colored pencil and shading around the white parts around my circle and doing a color fade out from my circles with blue. I thought about adding some more smaller circles with blues and greens throughout. And then, I don't know, I just chose to take this green marker that I originally had outlined my objects in. I like the paleness of the color. I like that it's not super bold or eye-catching, but it just kind of sits there against the white, and it is sort of like a detail that you notice when looking at the artwork for a little bit longer. It's not something you notice right away. So I liked that solution. I think it worked for getting some color up into the upper portion of my composition. I think it did the trick for that. And it just sort of creates an interesting optical illusion in a way. I did think about using you'll notice that I went in and I defined the edges of my circles where the circle met the black stripes with the white gel pen, which just gave it another little added detail that I kind of find interesting. And I thought about doing the same effect with the white gel pen against the black. And then after thinking about it, I decided against it because, remembering back to our composition, when we talked a lot about our composition in the past, we spoke about how it's important to leave a rest for the viewer's eye. in a piece of artwork, no matter what type of artwork you're making. Something realistic, a design, whatever the case, it's important to always provide some sort of a rest for the viewer's eye, a place where it's just a bit calmer, it's maybe not as detailed, it's a little flatter. And for me, in this design, I really feel like the black solid stripes are that for the viewer. And to add a pattern into that with white, I believe would create like a high contrast tension, and it would do the opposite of leaving a rest for the viewer's eye. And I already have many components here, right? I've got all my patterns, I've got my stripes going this way, I've got stripes going that way, I've got stripes in here, I've got some different colors, I've got a realistic emphasized area. So to add another thing to all of that, I think would be a bit too busy. And I feel like as it is right now, it is complete.